Picture yourself walking through a neighborhood in Munich, Germany. Stone facades line both sides of the street, heavy wooden shutters, thick plaster walls that have been standing since before the American Revolution. Now picture a side street in Tokyo, where reinforced concrete apartment blocks stand shoulder to shoulder, built to survive earthquakes that would flatten most structures on Earth. Walk through a village outside London, past brick row houses with chimneys that have been burning for 200 years. Now fly to a suburb outside Dallas, Texas. Brand new homes, fresh paint, perfectly landscaped lawns, and every single one of them is held up by thin pieces of lumber nailed together. The same material you would find in a backyard tree fort. How did the richest country on Earth become the only developed nation that builds its houses out of wood? It was 1832, and Chicago was barely a town. 300 people, a handful of buildings, mud streets along the edge of Lake Michigan. 93% of all new single-family homes built in America today are wood-framed. That number has barely budged in decades. Concrete makes up about 7%. Steel accounts for less than 0.5%. In the world's largest economy, almost every house is built the same way, with 2x4 lumber, plywood sheathing, and thousands of nails. Now compare that to the rest of the planet. In the United Kingdom, over 80% of homes are built with brick and block masonry. Across continental Europe, poured concrete and reinforced masonry dominate residential construction from Madrid to Moscow. In Japan, reinforced concrete is the standard for everything from single-family homes to dense apartment towers in Osaka and Yokohama. Travel through Latin America, from the sprawling neighborhoods of Mexico City to the hillside favelas of Sao Paulo, and you will find cinder block and poured concrete on nearly every residential street. Head to the Middle East, North Africa, or South Asia, and the pattern holds. Concrete, brick, stone. America is the outlier, and this is not a case of Americans not knowing about the alternatives. Concrete has been commercially available in the United States for well over a century. Steel framing exists and works beautifully. Brick is sold at every building supply warehouse in the country. American engineers designed some of the most advanced concrete and steel structures in the world, from super tall skyscrapers in Midtown Manhattan to sprawling data centers in Northern Virginia. But when it comes to the places where people actually sleep at night, America reaches for lumber every time. The easy answer is that wood is cheap and plentiful, and that is true as far as it goes. But cheap and plentiful alone does not explain why an entire civilization locked itself into one material for 200 years while the rest of the world moved on. To understand that, you have to go back to a warehouse on the shore of Lake Michigan and a construction technique so simple that people called it a joke. When European settlers first arrived in North America, forests covered nearly half the continent. Close to 1 billion acres of timber stretched from the Atlantic coast to the Mississippi River and far beyond. In England, deforestation had been a serious problem for centuries. In much of mainland Europe, wood was expensive and carefully managed by the state. But in America, trees were practically an obstacle. Settlers cleared them to make farmland, burned them for heat, and still had more left over than they could possibly use. For the first 2 centuries of colonial life, American homes were built the same way Europeans had always built them. They used heavy timber post and beam frames held together with hand-carved mortise and tenon joints, assembled by teams of 20 skilled carpenters who lifted entire walls into place. It was slow, expensive, and required years of specialized training. Then a man named George Snow changed everything. On the muddy shore of Lake Michigan, Snow built a warehouse using a technique no respectable carpenter would have attempted. Instead of massive timbers and hand-carved joints, he used small, lightweight pieces of lumber, standard 2x4s, nailed together into a load-bearing frame. No complex joinery, no 20-man crew, just lumber and nails. People laughed at it. They called it balloon framing because the structure looked so flimsy, they said it would blow away in the next strong wind. But it did not blow away. It stood, and it could be assembled by anyone with a hammer and a few days of practice. The timing was everything. Chicago's population was about to explode from 300 residents in the early 1830s to nearly 1 million by the 1890s. The city desperately needed buildings faster than traditional methods could provide. Balloon framing used 1/3 the wood of post and beam construction and could go up in a fraction of the time. Steam-powered sawmills were cutting standardized lumber at industrial scale across the Midwest. Factories were producing cheap machine-made nails by the barrel. For the first time in history, any farmer on the Great Plains could build his own house without hiring a master carpenter. By the 1880s, balloon framing was not a joke anymore. It was standard practice across the American West. Historians have said that balloon framing populated the frontier. Without it, boom towns from Denver to San Francisco could never have sprung up as fast as they did. But the real acceleration came a century later, when the country faced a crisis that made Chicago's growing pains look minor. After World War II, millions of soldiers returned home to find a nation with almost no available housing. Families were cramming into converted chicken coops, decommissioned trolley cars, and military surplus Quonset huts on the outskirts of cities across America. The shortage was staggering. Enter William Levitt. On Long Island, New York in 1947, Levitt and Sons purchased 4,000 acres of potato farmland and began building houses using a method borrowed from automobile manufacturing, a reverse assembly line. 26 specialized crews moved from lot to lot across the muddy fields of Nassau County. One team poured concrete slabs, another framed the walls, another team did nothing but install washing machines. At peak production, Levittown was completing 30 new homes every single day, each selling for less than $8,000 with no money down for veterans. Every one of those homes was wood framed because wood was the only material in America that could match that speed. Concrete needs days to cure. Brick masonry requires skilled masons who were already in short supply. Steel demands specialized fabrication and welding equipment, but a wood-framed house could go from bare dirt to move-in ready in a matter of days, using workers who needed weeks of training instead of years. Levittown became the blueprint for American suburban development from coast to coast, and that blueprint was lumber. That blueprint came with consequences the original builders never anticipated. Every year, wildfire season across the American West destroys thousands of wood-framed homes in California, Colorado, Oregon, and beyond. The town of Paradise, California lost nearly 14,000 residential structures in the 2018 Camp Fire, almost all of them wood-framed houses surrounded by dry forest. After every major fire, communities rebuild in the same locations, often using the same materials. Hurricane season along the Gulf Coast and the Atlantic seaboard tells a parallel story. Wood-framed houses are lighter, more flexible, and in many cases specifically engineered to handle sustained high winds. But when a Category 4 hurricane pushes a storm surge through a coastal neighborhood in Galveston, Texas, or the Florida Keys, the rebuild cycle begins again. Concrete and masonry structures across the Caribbean, built to different standards out of different necessity, often survive storms that level the wood-framed homes next door. The average lifespan of an American house is surprisingly difficult to pin down, but most industry estimates land somewhere between 50 and 70 years before major structural intervention becomes necessary. Meanwhile, across Europe, brick and stone homes are still standing after 2 or 3 centuries of continuous use. The childhood home of your great-great-grandparents in Florence or Edinburgh might still be someone's apartment today. In most American cities, the house your grandparents grew up in has already been torn down and replaced, probably more than once. This creates a rolling cycle of demolition and reconstruction that consumes enormous amounts of material and energy, and the environmental math gets genuinely complicated. Concrete production accounts for roughly 8% of all global carbon dioxide emissions. Steel manufacturing is another major contributor. Wood, by comparison, stores carbon and requires dramatically less energy to produce. A steel stud demands roughly 20 times the energy to manufacture as a standard wood 2x4. So the American system burns through houses faster, but each individual house leaves a smaller carbon footprint than its concrete equivalent. Whether that trade-off works in America's favor depends entirely on how often you are willing to tear down and start over. Some states have started pushing back. California and Colorado have tightened building codes in fire-prone zones, encouraging fire-resistant materials and defensible space landscaping. Along the Gulf Coast, concrete block construction has roughly doubled its market share in the southern states over the past decade, driven by stricter hurricane building codes. In Hawaii, where termites devour wood framing at alarming speed, over 70% of new single-family homes are built with steel frame construction, but these remain exceptions. Across the vast majority of the country, wood is still the default because the entire American construction supply chain, from the lumber mills of the Pacific Northwest to the building codes on the books to the training of every framing crew in every suburb in the country, was built around it. And this is the part that I find most fascinating about all of this. America did not stick with wood because wood is the best building material. Wood rots, wood burns, wood attracts termites and carpenter ants, wood warps in humidity and splits in deep cold. Every contractor in the country knows this. America stuck with wood because wood matches something deeper about how Americans relate to the idea of home itself. The average American moves 11.7 times in a lifetime, according to the Census Bureau. The average European moves roughly 4 times. An American house is not a family heirloom passed down through generations. It is a chapter. You live in it while the job is good, while the schools are right, while the neighborhood feels like it fits, and then you sell it and move to the next one. When a culture moves that often, building permanence into the walls does not just feel unnecessary, it feels like a waste. Why construct with materials designed to stand for 300 years when you will be somewhere else in 7 years? A family in a stone house outside Stuttgart is not just choosing a building material, they are choosing a relationship with a place. That house will shelter their children and very likely their grandchildren. The walls are thick because the commitment to that piece of ground is thick. A family buying a freshly framed home in suburban Phoenix is making an entirely different bet. They are betting on flexibility, on the next opportunity being somewhere else entirely. Neither choice is wrong. A family in Milan stepping out onto a concrete balcony to water their window boxes is not more thoughtful than a family in suburban Minnesota building a deck out of pressure-treated pine. They are living inside different assumptions about what a house is supposed to be. But it does reveal something. Building materials are not just engineering decisions. They are cultural signatures. Concrete says permanence. Brick says continuity. Stone says legacy. And wood, in the American context, says something this country has been saying since the wagon trains left Missouri and headed west across the Great Plains. We are not done moving yet. Next time you drive through an American subdivision, past the vinyl siding and the 2-car garages and the fresh lumber smell of new construction, think about the chain of events that put those walls together. 1 billion acres of forest, a warehouse on the shore of Lake Michigan, a man who nailed 2x4s together because he did not have time to learn anything fancier, a nation of 16 million returning soldiers who needed somewhere to sleep, and a culture that decided, somewhere along the way, that a house is not something you inherit. It is something you pass through. If that changes how you think about the place where you live, you might want to check out the video on your screen right now.